Hey, welcome back everyone to ANT 415 Ethnographic Methods. We are now down here in week 6 on the schedule. You'll be able to see that in a moment when the lights turn down. And as I said over the last week or so, the first third of the class was all about getting you ready to do research, right? We started out with kind of a philosophical, almost theoretical introduction to ethnographic methods. And for a lot of you, that was a nice transition because, we were in methods or theory last semester. So it was kind of almost a continuation of that. Then we talked about more specifically about how we actually do research, right? Thinking about how we narrow down the infinite possibilities of things to study into something manageable, right? And this is always a problem that we run into as ethnographers. Whether you have 11 weeks left in the semester to complete your research, or whether you've got a year in the field, either way, not enough time. There's lots of things out there. And there's things that you don't even know that you don't know, right? But part of what we do in here is help, at least in the first little bit, is help you narrow down kind of all the infinite possibilities to something that you can research in a manageable amount of time. That's what we've been working on for the last 3 weeks, right? We started with this chart of variables from Bernard for your homework number 1, getting you to think about what are the possibilities, right? It gave you a topic, water and people in eastern New Mexico. But rather than being kind of overly limiting, people came up with all kinds of ideas, right? It was amazing just the breadth of ideas that people came up with to look at about water and people in eastern New Mexico, right? Sometimes having kind of those guidelines, those boundaries helps you not just kind of be overwhelmed by those choices. That would be the idea there. In week 4, we did lit search. The idea being that you can't really pick which of those many variables that you came up with until you do a little bit of reading. And some of that reading was on real high level. What does anthropology say about water? What does it say about conservation or something like that? In general, all people, all times, all places, what are the big themes that we can see there? Some of it was ethnographic. If you look at a particular case study from an anthropological lens, what can we learn? What are the comparisons? Is it a comparison based on geography? Is it somewhere else on the high plains? Or is it something else where you're seeing similar themes in your topic? Right? Maybe you're looking at religion and agriculture, and you can pull ethnographic articles from different sources and different times and places, right? Think about that. And the third level was the local news. What's going on here in the, if not right now, in the immediate past? It's an interesting topic. What do you see in the newspaper, right? We looked, I think Taylor was in here last week, and she said, I can't find any local news, right, about water. There was just so much. We went through the newspapers, and whether it was the pipeline from Logan or if it was the big water contamination spill up at Cannon, I think it was last year, where they were distributing water to all the farmers. Water's in the news. I just saw a newspaper article this week that without the pipeline, Portales wouldn't have any water in 5 or 10 years or something like that, right? So it's a pertinent topic. The idea being that if you can find something that is interesting on all 3 of those levels, then you have a good research topic, right? Something that's locally relevant, ethnographically topical, that other people have said, this is a really cool topic and we're doing research on, and then kind of a broad dialogue within anthropology for you to engage in, right? Any topic you pick in anthropology, broadly enough, is going to have other people doing it, right? If you're going to study, I want to study the intersection between gender and religion, there's going to be just hundreds of articles about that, right? Or if I want to study the relationship between politics and economics, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of articles have been written about that topic. And so your job as a new ethnographer, new anthropologist coming up in grad school or undergrad, thinking about going to grad school, is not to invent a whole new subdiscipline or a whole new topic of inquiry. Is to think about what people have already done and how you can engage with that debate. The 2 ways that we engage with that debate are building off of someone, right? Usually when you write a book or you write an article, You don't know how to end your article or your book. The best thing to do is to say future research directions, right? These are things that, while I would have liked to cover them in my study, were beyond the scope of my studies. What people always write, right? So you can look at those and say, well, you know, they studied religion and politics and beliefs. But at the end, they said, well, you know, it has a lot to do with economics too. I really wanted to study that, but I ran out of time and money. Maybe some junior scholar could do that as a thesis or dissertation. That's great. That lets you know that there is a need for that. It allows you to apply for grants and things like that with a good rationale about why you want to do it. The other thing we do is to refute. Somebody writes something and you go, that's bull. I don't buy it at all. In fact, I see a counter case study in my field site. Somebody might have written an article that said, in terms of agriculture, there is no connection between religion and economics. So that's bull. I'm going to write an article that shows why. Build off of or refute. That's kind of what we do. But you can't do either of those if you don't do the literature, right? You're going to think that you invented this whole thing, brand new, even though there are lots of other scholars for 50 or 100 years looking at these same topics. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's good. You get to build off other people. You get a whole ethnographic corpus to stand on, standing on the shoulders of giants, right? The people who have come before us. So you don't have to do a lot of that basic research, or you can do your research and you can compare and you can think about how things have changed over time. If I looked at a study of water in Portales in the 1950s, it's going to be really different from one in the 70s or one today, something like that. And then last week we talked about research design. We talked about, so you've done the reading, you've thought about the materials, you've thought about how you could maybe construct some variables, and then kind of at the intersection of that Venn diagram between the possible and the literature review, you pick a topic, right? Or you pick a set of variables. In this case, we're going to do 2 because it's, you know, it's a short class and we don't have a ton of time for everything. And we figure out how we're going to do it, how we're going to operationalize those variables. How will I study, I don't know, religiosity? Is it something I'm going to look at church membership? Or am I going to count how many times you went to church last year? Or is it more of an attitude? I'm going to give you a survey about what are your attitudes about religion or something like that. The same with behavior. Are we going to look at actual behavior? Am I going to check people's water bills or take a meter and, you know, test the depth of their well? Or am I going to think about reported behavior? Is it enough to just report that someone has a well? Or do you as an ethnographer need to go out there and see it? There's arguments that can be made either way, right? Whether you trust your participants enough, whether you as a researcher are asking the right questions, all the kinds of things, right? And we also looked at ethical issues. We talked about some of the reasons why, even if you have a really great research problem, maybe you shouldn't do it. Maybe it's going to harm the people who you're working with. Maybe it's going to cause problems for you down the road. We talked about a lot of those. And you had the chance in your homework this week or last week to think about what those were and how you might deal with them. We also talked about some of the confounds. What are some of the problems with even good research questions? This can include things like people, if you're looking at things over time, people moving or dying, not completing your study. Influence of your group number 1 over group number 2, sharing of information between these groups so that you have kind of a muddled mess and you don't really know which direction the causation area is going. Maybe you have too many variables and you're not really sure what you're studying. These are all things that we have to kind of control for in our experimental design. That's why we try to make it as simple as possible. Some people in this class had very complicated experimental design, but I think it's good to kind of make it simple, and then you can always expand it out a little bit if you find new and interesting stuff. That's the first 5 weeks of class. Second, third or middle 2/3 of the class, we're going to be doing different kinds of methods. This week we'll be doing participant observation, and we'll kind of continue it up with field notes the following week. And week 8, we're going to have our review and our test number 1. I'm also going to not just do normal review bell game stuff, but we'll also kind of like check in on your project. This will be a good time where we'll actually, I think I'm going to schedule like individual meetings with you all, like 15 minutes or so. And we can, like on the Monday maybe, and we can discuss, you know, how you're doing at this point after you've done at this point 2 participant observations. Whether you think your research question is good or whether you think it needs to be refined a little bit in light of what you're doing. And then after the midterm, we're going to keep doing different methods. We're going to do unstructured and semi-structured interviews along with life histories. And we're going to do questionnaires and cultural domain analysis, digital ethnography, and then textual analysis. Then we'll be pretty close to the end of class, and we'll be working on our posters, our presentations, and kind of going back to this applied anthropology, anthropological ethics here at the end to talk about, so what do we do with all our research once we're all done with that? So that's kind of where we're going. So this is the beginning of part 2 of the class. I think this is my favorite part, once we move away from kind of talking about methods in general to specific, and we're going to try to have specific activities as well. We're going to talk about participant observation today. And then on Wednesday, we're going to do a little activity, probably this time or so, in 10 or 15 minutes after class starts. We're going to head on over to Einstein's, and we're going to do a little bit of a memory game. You're going to be a participant observation. You do a little participant observation over at Einstein's, and then we will all go to the same situation. We'll write down what we see, and then we're going to compare, and we're going to see, does Jose's field notes look like mine? Is there something that I saw that he didn't see? Do we both remember the same situation differently? Did that guy working at the counter have a green shirt or a red shirt? We're going to look at the questions of validity. We're also going to look at these questions of objectivity when you do it. Do you get the right answers? Or maybe something a little off in the way you do that? Okay, let's look at this real quick. So this week for your homework, for your assignments, you have discussion board number 5, homework number 4, and quiz number 4. So this is the discussion board. Based on your research question, what are at least 2 events or activities that would be ideal situations for participant observation? If you don't have your research question, this is going to be a harder question to answer. If you do, then should be really easy, right? If I want to study the relationship between people's political affiliations and how much water they use, what might be 2 good participant observation events that I might check out? Yeah. Political rally, right? You go to get to be midterm election season. It's happening November. So people are going to start having politics stuff, right? There's going to be rallies. There's going to be people handing out flyers. There's going to be people in the square. They just opened the new Democratic Party headquarters over by Landville, right? So lots of stuff going on where you could stop in and see that. So that's kind of one side. What's something else? It's a different angle we can go. We need 2 events or activities. We're looking at politics and water usage. That would certainly tell you the politics side, and you could ask people about water while you're there. What might be the flip side? Yeah. Maybe something with water usage, right? If I'm going to look at water use in politics, maybe one of my events is centered on politics, in which I ask about water to people there. And the other one could be like, I want to study somebody using water, whether it's a farm, whether it's a house, whether it's a school event, and then you can kind of ask people about their politics, right? So try to figure out an event that's going to somehow give you access to your 2 variables that you need. Think about what these events could tell you about your research question. And then for your homework this week, you're actually going to do it, right? Your discussion board is like, what would you like to do? And then participant observation, homework number 4 is you actually doing it. We're going to start out slow. Remember, you need, I think, 5 of these for your final paper. I believe that's the number. Let's look at that real quick. Yeah, you're going to need 5 participant observation events over the course of the semester, but for this week, you're only going to do 1. Right? It's just to kind of ease you into it. We'll do another one next week. But you'll start with 1, right? It's better to do 1 good one than to try to do a whole bunch of, half-done ones. If you're a graduate student, you try for 2. Remember, you need to conduct at least 4 additional ones, over the course of the semester to get your 5. If you're an undergrad, grad students, you're going to need 10 of these. And if you remember from, intro to cultural, it's very similar to kind of some of the events we did in there, or the activities where we did participant observation, right? You're going to select a site or an event, and you want to make sure that you meet the following criteria. You have a right to be there. You have permission. You don't walk into something that you're not allowed to be there. I want to study the Sacred Order of the Moose Lodge, and they have their closed secret meetings, and I bust in with my ethnographer notebook. I'm ready to take notes, and they throw me out on the street. Not only did I get in trouble for that, but I probably won't be allowed back in. Better to make those connections slowly and work your way up to the secret stuff. Start with things that are more public. Make sure it's not familiar to you, something outside of your everyday life. We'll talk about the indigenous ethnographer or the local ethnographer and maybe challenge there, but try to pick something different from what you're familiar with. Has a clear beginning and end, limited in time so you can see the whole event. It's legal. You don't have harm or risk to yourself or others. That you're curious about it, right? If you're not curious or interested, it's going to be really hard to figure out what you're doing there. And then you try to make a connection. This can be either beforehand, somebody who's, I want to study the relationship between gender and whether you have a yard or a garden or something. So I'm going to join the gardening club or something like that. And my friend is over there. They invite me to a meeting. That's great. I can use them as my key informant. Or if not, I can go there, be personal, be social, make friends. Right? This is about participant observation. We're not just observing from afar. We're not natural scientists observing our test tubes or our frogs. We want to go in there, make friends, talk to people, do that kind of stuff. And a lot of it is to kind of set up future research. You make a good impression the first time, people are more likely to welcome you back. Then you're going to observe and participate, take notes about the event, take a little small pad. I had one that was probably this big. When I was in the field, you can also do it on your phone. You don't want to sit there and write or type in your computer the whole time. It makes people kind of anxious or nervous, if you're just writing everything. If they say something, you type it into the computer really fast, especially if you haven't talked to them about it or it's not been cleared. But you can make notes, especially mnemonic things where you try to remember how many people are there, kind of how the situation is organized. And then you can go back later in your field notes, which we'll talk about more next week, and kind of flesh it out. And then you're going to kind of do just a short field notes. This is not nearly as in-depth as we're going to do next week, but it's still good to start practicing this. And it's going to be important because it's how you collect data. It's not enough just to go out and have a cool adventure, right? Oh, I went to the rodeo this weekend. Anybody go to the rodeo? I was the only one there. It was fun. I went to the rodeo and had a good time, and I saw the cows and the horses and did all this stuff, right? I'm studying ranching, but I don't write anything down. It's just a fun thing that I did on Saturday night. I need to actually write down who were the people in groups that were there. What was the thing like? What was the smells, the sights, the sounds, smell of the manure, right? The sounds of the animals, the music playing over the loudspeaker, the types of food they served at the rodeo. What did you do during the activity? What did you participate in? Were you more hanging back or did you jump in there? Did you watch the event or did you get on a horse and rope some cows? Did you talk to anybody? Did you have conversations with the people who were there? And if so, what did you talk about? You should have conversations. That's kind of the point. And then the social norms or rules of the setting. Who's where? How is it laid out? Is there a clear leader? Or is everyone just kind of doing their own thing? How do people know when the event starts? How do people know when the event stops? What are the norms of social interaction going on? Especially if it's something outside of your normal comfort zone, it should be pretty easy to tell, like if you go to a different church, right? You go to church all the time, but now instead of the Baptist church, you went to the Catholic church at the time. And suddenly everyone's standing up and sitting down all together, and you don't know what to do. Everyone's making signs with their hands, you don't know what to do, right? You got to learn. And that's part of what participant observation is all about. That's your homework for this week. We're also going to be thinking about big questions like, we're going to talk about positionality. How does who you are make a difference in your research? If we are all studying the exact same thing, we're all going to study, politics and water. We're all going to go to the rodeo, right? We're all going to do the same topic. We're all going to go to the same event. But maybe we all come back with really different results. Some of that could be who we talk to, but some of that could be who we are, right? So we'll talk about age, we'll talk about gender, we'll talk about wealth, we'll talk about family status, and how all those things might make a difference in how people relate to you. We'll also think about subjectivity. Is ethnography and participant observation in particular, is it objective or is it subjective? Or is it both? It's probably both. Is this a problem if we have subjectivity? And if so, how might we overcome it? And then we'll talk about the stages of participant observation. What happens when you get there? It seems to be kind of a general flow of things. What are the stages that you should go through, as the beginning, the middle, and kind of the end of your research project? So think about those kind of questions, and we'll discuss them this week. Okay, so we'll do a short intro lecture today, and then we're gonna, like I said, we'll do a little bit of lecture on Wednesday, and we're gonna do our activity. But we'll start off talking about participant observation. What is it? What do I mean by participant observation? Ethan.
You go out and you be a part of the things that people you're observing enjoy or care about, and you just write your notes about it.
Yeah, right. It's two parts: participant and observer. And Bernard actually talks about this a little bit, right? He talks about that when we talk about participant observation, usually it's taken for granted, right? That we just go out there and do stuff, hang out with people, deep hanging out, as Clifford Geertz said, and then maybe write some stuff down. But he cautions us, right, that there are differences between being a participant of doing participant observation or being a participant observer and being a full participant, what's often called going native. This would be the case that if I went to a village in Belize, I could go there, I could live for a year, I could do the cacao farming thing, plant my chocolate, go to the market, sell it there, do all that kind of stuff. But maybe I don't write any notes, right? I'm just there, I'm experiencing it. It just becomes a long vacation. Or it becomes something deceptive, right? I'm going to study the circus. And so I just kind of go full native of the circus, paint my face like the clowns, learn to juggle, use the trapeze. And I deceive people into thinking that I'm really just there to be part of it, right? You're not clear about what you're actually doing. On the other end of the spectrum is the pure observer. Using my circus example again, because there's a circus major at Florida State where I got my master's. My parents tried to convince me. Said, have you considered a career with opportunities like the circus? Not like anthropology. No, Mom, anthropology is for me, right? But I could study the circus. I could study the circus major there. But instead of getting on the trapeze, instead of painting my face like a clown, I sit in the front row and I take notes, right? I observe people as if I was a natural scientist, trying to maintain my objectivity, trying to stay away from making personal connections or influencing the situation anyway, right? I don't want to mess things up. And some ethnographic methods use pure observation, but not many, right? Because we're interested in the people, we're interested in the interaction, and we have this phenomenological tradition in which we're interested in how things feel, right? How does it feel to be the star of the circus out there under the spotlight? How does it feel to be on the trapeze doing the triple somersault? You can't know that from just observing. So we do participant observation. We participate in these events, and then we write them down. You're interested in both the emic and the etic view, the insider's view, but you're not just doing the insider's view, right? You're thinking about the literature that you've read beforehand. What are the big issues? And you're also trying to observe it from, an etic perspective, or at least trying to take that emic perspective and make it into something that can go into dialogue with maybe other people's articles or books or whatever. He also talks about observer participants, right? Kind of the flip of participant observation. This often happens when you're already an insider. If I wanted to study the politics of university bureaucracy, right? I could do research study on this, and then we do this all the time. It's so funny. They're like, here at the university, they're always like, but who could know why students choose which major over another major? Well, like, but we could know, right? Like, we are working at this university and we talk to students every day. We could do an actual study of this. But I'm not an outsider, right? I'm an insider. I know what's going on. I know about the bureaucracy. So you can study it, but from an insider's perspective. Similarly, if you wanted to, my friend Juan, he was a little kid when we started doing research. He was like 12 or 13. Now he's working on his PhD at Brown University or something, right? But he was a little my kid, and he would go around and help me. He was like kind of my research assistant. And his dad was really into chocolate, so he was a good guy to have around. He knew about all the stuff. He knew everybody in the community. But him and his dad would start asking questions after a while. Like after a while, they had heard me ask my questions so many times that they would ask people those same questions. And like, I just like to be an ethnographer, right? So it was like an insider doing an analysis of their own culture. You can do that as well. What do you think might be some issues you run into with that? Yeah. Yeah, what do you think? Yeah. Yeah. You can often get blind spots, right? Because you're so used to the situation. This is my community. I've lived here my whole life. I know everyone here. And so it's just not an interesting question, right? Like, why do people sell their chocolate? Because they like money, right? Like, there's a simple answer for that if you've never really thought about that. You might also only pick people that you know or that you like, right? If I live there and I have oh, I really like this family, but that family, that's our sworn enemy for 5 generations, I might not talk to them, right? And I might miss a vital piece of that picture, or I might write about them in a negative way. Those cows over there, right, or those texts, they just use up all the water, right? Or they practice that old religion, those pagan things. I might have prejudice, right? I also, you might have issues with deception, right? People might not know that you're actually doing research. They might just think that you're a curious person in your own local community, right? Because you're not coming out and telling people, I'm a researcher doing this. So it's just something to be aware of, especially if you're doing research in your own community. What might be some benefits, though, even with all those drawbacks of doing research in a community you're familiar with? So, for instance, in the Latter-day Saints community, right? It's your own community. You know those people. You have an idea of like what the rituals are like. You're not going to go in as an outsider. What advantages might that give? Yeah.
It's easier to get in and to really dig deep.
Yeah, right. You're going to get in easier. You have connections, right? Because I've been going to this church, so I know somebody who the summer camp with somebody who lived in Logan. Stay with their family when I go up there. You might also know what the correct questions to ask. You're going to spend a lot less time being mystified by kind of the boring surface level stuff. We'll talk about this later, but every person who goes to my village, all the guys are always mystified in the beginning, like going to the farm. So fun to get a chocolate and machete. And all the women are always mystified about making tortillas. There's been so many articles written about making tortillas in a Maya village. Why do you think that is?
Something new and exciting, something you're not used to.
Yeah, but it's also something people invite you to do. It's like low threat. Like, you want to make some tortillas and cook some food? And yeah, I'm like in the culture now, right? Versus if you were already part of that culture, you would know that's just an everyday thing. You would already know how to do those things. Make your farm or make tortillas or something, right? So there are pros and cons to each, but it's just good to be aware of those before you get in, right? You need to think about, how does my positionality affect that? This is a good question to talk about. What is positionality? It's a good intro to cultural type question.
Where do you stand as opposed to the community you're studying?
Yeah, it could be that. It could also be maybe who you are in relationship to other potential ethnographers. So if we were Team Stanley ethnographers going to do our research, and I took you all to my village, in San Jose Village for Christmas. Yay. We're all gonna do this research project. What are some different variables that we might all have in this classroom that might give us different results? What are some things about you that may be different from your classmates? Yeah. Yeah, your gender, your sex, right? Why might that be important? We live in a very like gender equal world, or at least there's this idea of gender equality. Girls can do anything boys can do. Boys can be sensitive and wear pink. Doesn't make them less manly. But why might that still be an issue on your gender or your gender identity? Yeah.
I mean, one thing I said earlier, how all of the first-time ethnographers, the men are always really interested in the farming aspect. Like, yeah, I get to go chop cocoa beans.
Mm-hmm.
And women are always interested in the community aspect. Like, yeah, I get to go make tortillas.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. All right. And some of that might be your own personal interest, but it also might be the way the community is structured, right? Communities, especially ones we do ethnography in, don't always have the same ideas of gender, right? They might have more strict social norms. And, you know, we talk about gender being performative, and in many ways it is, right? And a lot of women ethnographers like Baines in Belize, right, have put herself in kind of a masculine role, or at least an ambiguous role, where she can go make tortillas with the women, but also put on her pants and her boots and go out to the farm with the men, right? In a way that a regular Maya woman might be not. You might also have issues with your informants. Why might your gender have an impact on what people tell you maybe during an interview? Yeah, I think Sam. Why might your gender have an impact? Well, your gender and the gender of the person you're interviewing or talking to or doing just an observation. Why might that make a difference in the type of information you get?
There might be bias coming from who you're interviewing.
Yeah, right. A girl never needs to know about farming. Why would I talk to you about that? Or on the flip side, right? Like men don't, or even more, like if I was interested in childbirth, right? I'm interested in the Maya process of childbirth. Do you go to the hospital? Do you have your baby at home? Do you have a bush doctor? Do you have do you go to the OR? Why might I have a problem getting that data in a way that you might not?
Because they're more willing to talk to a woman about childbirth than they are to.
But why?
Just because like, I would know like generally like more about it.
Yeah, right. You have the biological knowledge, like as a woman, physical anatomy knowledge, but also maybe social knowledge. Even if you really don't, they kind of expect you to like have been around kids before, take care of kids in a way that like, even though I'm spend a lot of time with my son, they might be like, guys don't know anything about kids, right? What else?
well, kind of like you and Sam were both saying, the village's concept of gender roles may have an impact on one person's individual success with interviewing based on their own gender.
Yeah.
Like the men may not be as willing to tell a female ethnographer about farming because that's not a woman's job.
Yeah.
In the same sense that the women may not be willing to tell a man as much about how much they make tortillas because that's not a man's job.
Yeah. Or it might even if it's not a secret, it might just be obvious. Like women be like, yeah, we know how many tortillas to make, right? And it almost seems like a silly question. You make all the tortillas, right? As many as you can. So yeah, gender can be a really important thing. And it's why oftentimes in ethnography, especially kind of long-term ethnography, people go in pairs or in teams. A lot of times people do couples ethnography. Why might that be useful? Why might I have gotten better data once? I was there for 6 months in Belize the first time by living by myself, bachelor pad in my little hut. And then my wife came down and stayed for another year after that. Dr. Schmidt opened sociology. Why do you think my data was so much better the second 6 months? Do you think it's just because I was a bad ethnographer and she needed to show me how to do it? What do you think, Nick? Yeah.
Class that she teaches.
Yeah.
So it's each other.
Yep. Yeah.
Two perspectives out.
It's so much better to have two perspectives, right? There's so many times you feel like you're going crazy. Like, this person really just say that? Or like, I don't understand how these two pieces of culture go together. Or the other person can have a really key piece of information, right? I've been going to the farm forever with all these guys, right? Thinking about the cow farming, but I didn't really have any good information on the processing, because the women were doing all the processing. They were doing the fermentation, the drying, and I could kind of observe it, but I wasn't really as much a part of it. But when she went, she was mostly based in the house, right? And working with women. And so she got to kind of see the other half of the process. We kind of put our two sides together and understood a little bit more about what was going on from this kind of, from both genders. Yeah.
I think another thing that helped you get a much wider perspective once she was there is you're an anthropologist, she's a sociologist. So not only was she able to, I guess, analyze the half of the population that wouldn't tell you the stuff you needed to know, she was also able to bring a new perspective to the world.
Yeah, she had different research questions. She was like diabetes, chocolate, but like anything in ethnography, right? You start doing this observation on a farm, you're talking about chocolate, and suddenly, like it leads into issues about like diet and lifestyle, which like you tell, oh, somebody has diabetes, right? So we could look at that together. There was also a benefit of looking like a married couple. So this is the second position, is your family position. I had very different interactions with people as a single guy in my master's, a married but not having my spouse there, married with my spouse there for a year, and then we're going back in Christmas with the little baby. And I assume that's going to be real different as well. Why might that be? Yeah.
Always with status and relationship.
It's all about status. It's so much status. Yeah.
The higher status is married man. Woman, and now you're going to have the higher status as a father than you did as a married man with no kids.
Yeah, and it's not even the status, it's access to information, right? Why are you going to talk to a single guy with no kids and no wife about child rearing practice? Nobody's going to do it, right? Maybe only in the abstract. But once you have your own kid, Bernard taught us a really great job about this, like, it's a great opening, right? I have this kid, he's running around doing stuff. Somebody else is going to be like, oh, I have a kid too. Like, when did your kid learn how to walk, right? Or how did you teach your kid how to do that, right? I was so mad, the funny story. When I was a master's student, I was like 25. I'm a grown man, right? I got my master's degree. I'm going to believe on myself. I'm doing this research project, and everybody there calling me muchacho. What are you doing, little teen? It's like teenager guy, right? Unmarried young man. I'll be like, I'm a man. I'm a grown man, right? Okay, God. If you're ever looking to refute someone calling you muchacho, getting kind of angry and pissed off, it's not really a good way. It seems childish, right? And so I was only have access to those kind of things that muchachos would know, right? A lot of places we go and do research are all about kind of hierarchy of knowledge. Elders know certain things, they pass it on. You'll find this in your research too. And then as you kind of get older in life, you're going to have different opportunities, right? The things that a teenager needs to know, how to drive a car, how to get in college, how not to get arrested, are really different from what a 20-something needs to know, or a 30-something, or a 50-something. Different parts in your life, your status, but also your age is going to make a really big difference. If you're a young person, you might have an easier time hanging out with young people because you know the same slang, you watch the same movies, you're part of the same demographic. But at the same time, you might also have a good in with old people, right? Old people might try to give you a little bit of wisdom. Here, young buck, let me tell you about how things are supposed to be. You get that all the time. Let me show you. Let me give you a little words of wisdom. Old man. What other positionalities? We got gender, we got parenting, we got personal characteristics. Yeah, and your relationship status can even make a difference, right? What difference do you think it would make if you have, if you go down, you live in a community, we're going to Amazon this time, let's mix it up, and you bring your partner down there. Do you think it makes a difference if you're just boyfriend, girlfriend, if you're engaged, if you're married, if you're divorced, right, and you don't bring your spouse? Do you think those statuses might have a difference on how people interact with them? Yeah.
I guess, and to me it's mostly because like I'm just thinking about interactions here between, they're talking about relationships, like people who are always like, oh, it'll be different when you're married.
Yeah.
It'll be different when you're
Yeah, yeah.
married, it'll be different this, that. It's as if there's like a hierarchy of relationship status.
It definitely is.
And there's a big difference, and I think this is like across all cultures, there's a big difference between just dating someone and being married to that person.
Yeah, right.
Like it's some folks that don't even recognize the boyfriend and girlfriend status. Like it doesn't, nothing matters until you're.
Yeah, or you're like living in sin or something like that, right? And then you have your wedding and then you're like a legitimate couple. And so oftentimes ethnographers, like when we first went to Belize, Dr. Schmidt and I were only engaged and we hadn't been married, but we told people we were married. Use a little bit of deception maybe, but why might we do that? Yeah.
Well, one thing cultural differences, they may not recognize engaged as a valid relationship status.
Yeah, or you're not allowed to live together as engaged, right? Maybe you're not allowed to do these kind of things.
They may have different like expectations for engaged couples.
Yeah. And similarly for divorced. Yeah. What do you think?
Person may learn more as a married couple in that community than you would as engaged.
Definitely, right?
Maybe more learning certain things about marriage practices and.
And you can engage in relationships you couldn't before. Like people won't ask, if you're unmarried, you'll never ask to be a godparent, right? Because they want you to be a couple. You should have godparents should be a couple. So you need to be married, and they need to be married in a certain church, right? So Catholics are going to have other Catholic married people be their godparents, not Baptist religion. He also gives this great example of divorce. Why might being divorced be a problem in some communities? It's sinful, right? And so here's this great example of this lady who's doing field work and got tired of people telling her how bad she was for being divorced. So she's like, yeah, my husband died. Which, you know, is a little bit of deception, but he's dead to me, right? Like, I don't want to talk to him anymore. And it gave her, you know, a lot more social legitimacy because there were a lot of widows in that community versus, you know, divorce was kind of a taboo subject. Yeah, so who we are makes a big difference. Participant observation is really the keystone. We got about 5 minutes left. The keystone of ethnography, right? It's the thing that we do often before we start our interviews. If you look at the syllabus, we're doing participant observation, field does now, then we'll have our midterm, and then we'll start our interviews. Why do we do that in that order? It's not an accident. In fact, it was a conscious decision because Bernard does not put the chapters in that order, if you notice. I rearranged his book. Bernard's been doing this for 50 years. What does he know, right? I'm going to fix it. Why did I switch the order? Yeah. Right? So you ask the right questions. If you come in with a list of questions, I've already made my list of questions and I'm here, I'm going to interview 20 people, and then I'm going to do some participant observation afterwards. It doesn't really work, right? You might ask the wrong questions. You might ask questions that are either too hard or too complicated to be answered in kind of a simple one-off way, or way too easy. People might look at you like, well, yeah, you know, like, of course women make tortillas or something like that. Right? You won't even know what the right answers, the right questions to ask. And you might not know what the right answers are. Right? A lot of when you do ethnography, it's not necessarily knowing what the right answer is going to be that somebody's going to say, but it tells you what some of the ranges of possible answers could be, right? I did a whole bunch, I did like 8 months of participant observation before I started doing research. So when I started doing my interviews, well, before I did the interviews, when I started doing those interviews though, I kind of knew what some acceptable ranges of questions or answers were. I'm interested in how many cacao trees you have. And I've done research for 8 months, been to 150 different cacao farms. Right? I have a good idea of how many trees people have. I know that probably that there's only 6 farms in the whole district that have more than 5,000 trees. So if somebody's like, yeah, 10,000 trees, I either know they're exceptional, they're way outside of the normal boundaries or an outlier, or they're bullshit, right? They're like, you're just too hard, right? I can just tell you whatever you want. So it helps you kind of know both the questions to ask and what people, you know, might be answering with. The good thing about participant observation is that it can be, as a method, it can be used by both by lots of different kinds of perspectives in ethnography, right? It can be used by people who are strictly real strong positivists, real interested in that hard data. And it can also be used by interpretativists, people who are interested in interpreting the situation, right, Geertzian perspective, or understanding the phenomenon. It can also, on another axis, it can be used for gathering qualitative data, how things smell, how things feel, the relationships between people. But you can also use participant observation to do good quantitative scientific research, right? I can go to someone's farm and I can, while I'm there, count how many cacao trees they have. I can go to the market with people and see how much they're actually selling, right? So it's a great method, and you can use it in lots of different situations in order to gain the information that you need to do your research. So next time we're going to continue talking about participant observation.